Recording. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Daf Yomi. I'm Rabbi Kovacs, filling in for Rabbi Silber. We have sponsors today, a Talmud Torah sponsor, Adam and Yudit Benzev, in honor of their children, Jake Sarina and Rosie, and a week of learning sponsor from the Friends of the Pacinos. Would like to wish Mel and Judy a Mazel Tov and Seichem L'Shalom, the upcoming Aliyah. Although you're sad to see you go, we cannot be happier for you to embark on the next stage of your life. And don't worry, I gave Mel $1 already to be my shliach, to bring it to your shalom. Thank you so much, Saeed. You're a merit to the shul and to the entire universe. It's amazing. And today's daf is Yoma Ayin Hey, Alava Shalom. So since it's Ayin Hey, if you'd like to make more sponsorships in honor of the memory of someone's neshama, it's a good daf for that. We're picking up at the very bottom of Ayin Dalit Ad, as in Ad Delo Yada, which is how drunk we get on Purim. One note about yesterday, we said that looking at a woman could be even worse than the act itself. There's actually a Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, Perik Dalid. We're on the bottom of Ayin Dalid. Worse. I'm just saying what the Gemara says. I'm not making up anything, okay? Understand, Lamaisa, no one's chayiv misa for looking at women, but Mistakel Barayus is a problem. Now the Rambam says, Perik Dalid of Hilchos Tshuva, Halacha Dalid. He says he lists a bunch of things that are very hard to do tshuva for, and one of them, he says, is actually looking at the rayos. So Mistakel Barayus, he says, why? Because people don't think it's a problem. So people don't think it's such a big deal to look at a rayos, so it's hard to do tshuva for because people don't really think it's so wrong. So this is it's a big challenge in our generation with our children and with internet access. It's something we should all be careful of. So great, now we're picking up at the very bottom line. We've started talking about the man. We're going to have a lot of man today. It's going to be a delicious day in Daf Yomi land, and we're going to be dorish some psukim and have some beautiful agadata and some valuable life lessons. So the very bottom line of Ayin Dalid, Amid Beis, V'ki Yiten, B'kos Eino, Yitchalach B'meisharim. When you put your eye on the cup of wine, you will walk in the plains. You'll walk in a flat, straight path. It's easy going with the wine, as we say. It's interesting, the beginning of this pasuk, they don't bring the beginning. This is only the end of the pasuk, but I have the whole pasuk here, and it's one we've heard of before, because the pasuk is Al Tere Yain Ki Adam. Don't see the wine when it reddens. Ki Yiten Bekais Eino Yitchalach B'meisharim. It's a pasuk in Mishle, in the 23rd chapter, and it mentions wine being red. And you should know, there's this halacha lama'aseh, the Shulchan Aruch brings that red wine is superior and preferable. And if we try to use red wine when we can, there's some spooky Zohar things about using white wine at certain hours of the day for Kiddush. But red wine, the halacha is red wine is preferable. If you can use it, there's an interesting taz about blood libels. He said, Davka, don't use red wine, but that was in a different time when Nebuch, the non-Jews, were accusing Jews of things to do with blood. But red wine is typically preferable. We remember this from the bracha Tova Metiv. We talked about this in Pesachim, Daf 101. We talked about this in Brachot many times. I actually told Rabbi Silber, I said, Rabbi Silber, you should give a shiur about a Tova Metiv because you're Bucky in wines. You appreciate a fine wine. You should tell us what's the best wine, what's a good wine, the halachot. So really a red wine is preferable to white wine. That's the beginning of the pasuk. But the Gemara is going on the end of the pasuk. When you put your eyes on the cup of wine, it's like you're traveling, it's like you're going easy. You're easy going. Rav Ami, Rav Asi. So Rav Ami and Rav Asi give two different pshatim in this pasuk. Hadamar, kolanotein eino bekaiso, top of Ayin Hey, whoever puts his eye in his cup. Rashi explains, it's not just he's drinking wine, he's ohev shichros. He loves to be drunk. He's a habitual drunkard. It's nebuch, he's an alcoholic we're talking about. So what happens? Arayot kulan domot alav kemeshor. So all of the arayot, all of the forbidden sexual relations are like mishor. They're like flat, easygoing. He doesn't see the pitfalls, the mountains. They look accessible to him. Once he's imbibing wine, it looks accessible, and he might go for it. We know, of course, from the juxtaposition in the Torah of Nazir and Sota, that people who saw the Sota bekilkula, they saw the Sota being punished, they would say, well, she was drinking wine with another man, and it led her into all this trouble, and they become a Nazir from Yain. So we know there's a relationship between drinking too much wine and someone thinking arayot is permissible to him. Chad Amar, Kola noted Ena Bekosa, someone who's this habitual drunkard, Lo Alenu, Kola Olam Kulo Dome Elav Kamishor. The entire world looks like accessible to him, looks easy to him. And Rashi explains he's willing to steal money from people to support his habit. So it's a terrible thing if someone can become addicted to the point where they're going to they're going to borrow money to get their fix, to get their high, to get another cup of wine. And if he thinks that forbidden women might be accessible to him, kal v'chomer, he thinks that someone else's money is accessible to support his habit. So it's a very dangerous thing. We know wine can be used for kiddush, for kedusha, and it could be also used as a terrible addiction. So we have to be careful of the things Hashem gives us and use them for holy ends and not for profane ends. So another similar pasuk, da'aga belev ish, worry in the heart of a man, yischena, you push it aside. Rav Ami, Rav Ashi, Chadamar yishchena, he should actually push it midaito, out of his mind. So if you're worried, the eitzah is remove the worry from your mind. Don't think about it. Whatever you think about, that's what you think about. And actually, the neuroscientists say whatever your mind is busy with, you get good at doing that. This is why they practice, pitchers will practice pitching hundreds, thousands of times, so those neural pathways in their brain are faster. It's like exercising your brain. So whatever you think about, you get good at thinking about. Someone's always worrying, they get really good at worrying. Chadamar, yisichena lecherim. The other one says, what do we mean? Yeshchena, yisichena. You speak it out to other people. You talk to other people. You get it off your chest. I think Jews invented psychoanalysis and therapy. It's right out of this Gemara. So Freud was right out of this Gemara. I don't think he ever learned the Gemara, but it's right out of this Gemara. You tell other people your problems, and Rashi says, Shema Yisu Eitzah. Maybe they'll give you a good Eitzah. You try to seek out people who have more life experience, who have been in the same or similar challenges you face, and see how they dealt with it, how they got through it. You talk it out with them. Not Lashon Hara, God forbid, but you talk out your troubles. You get another Eitzah, you get another perspective, and it can help you through life. So that's how to remove worries. Two approaches, complementary approaches to remove worries from your mind. The Nachash and the snake, Nachash Kadmoni, Afar Lachmo, his food is dust. Understand, literally, he crawls on his belly and dust is going in his mouth all day, and the food he eats, these rodents, they're all covered in dirt and dust, so he's always tasting the taste of dust. We're going to explain this. Rabbi Ami Asi, Chad Amar, Afilu Ochel Kol Ma'adane Olam, even if he eats all the most delicious food in the world, Tawim Behem Tam Afar, he still tastes the dust. The dust is what's always in the snake's mouth. Chad Amar, and the other says, Afilu Ochel Kol Ma'adane Olam, even if he eats all the most delicious, tasty foods in the world, Ein daito miyushevet, he doesn't get satisfaction, alov ad sheyochel afar, until he tastes the dust. He got used to eating dust. That's what the snake is always having in his mouth. So even if you gave him delicious food, he still wants the dust. Mostly, a man can get used to anything. A man can get used to a bad situation, bad food, a bad matzav, and he gets used to it, he goes back to it. It's like we said above about addiction. A person can get used to anything. His brain gets used to it, he craves it. You really have to be careful what you get used to. There's some people, they get used to going on very expensive vacations, and they end up racking up bills on their credit card because that's what they're used to. You have to be aware of your habits. It sounds strange because they're habits, but you need to put your mind on what your habits are and not get into dangerous and harmful habits. Now, more about the snake. This is amazing Gemara, Rabbi. Today is all amazing Gemaras. This one is really juicy. Tanya Amar Rabbi Yossi, Bo Irei, Shlok Midat HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Midat Basar V'Dam. See that the midos, the paths of Hashem, are not like those of man. Midat Basar V'Dam, what does a man do? Mekonit et Chavero, he gets in a real argument with his friend. Chavero is his friend. This was his friend, but now he's really upset with him. What does he do? Yored imo lachayev. He descends with him on his life. Rashi explains he tries to take everything. He tries to take revenge. He tries to go after his parnasa, his mishpacha, anything he can get his hands on, he tries to attack it. He tries to go all out once he's fighting with his friend. He used to be a friend. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu enoken. Hashem does not do this. We're going to see. Kilo leta nachash, when Hashem cursed the snake, so it's a curse. The snake has to crawl in his belly. But what happens? Ole legog, the snake goes up on the roof. Mizunah tavimo, his food is with him, meaning the dust, the creatures that are in the dust. Yored lamata, he goes down into the earth. Mizunah tavimo, his food is still there. So even though the snake was cursed, there's a silver lining in the curse, that he will always have food accessible in the dirt with him, even though he's been cursed and kicked out from Hashem. Kila let Canaan, he cursed Canaan. Now really Noach cursed Canaan, but the brachot and the curses that Noach said were really with Ruach HaKodesh. It was really divine inspiration. So what was the curse of Canaan? The Eved Lomo, that Canaan will be a slave to shame. So what happens to a slave? Ochel mashraba ochel, he eats whatever his master eats. Shote mashraba shote, he gets to drink whatever his master drinks. Now you should know that in Jewish tradition, slavery is much different. That Chazal tell us, if you own a slave, an Eved Kanani, and you have one bed, he gets the bed. You have one pillow, he gets the pillow. You have one cup of wine, he gets the wine. Because he's working for you, he's schlepping. You have to treat him right, you have to treat him well. And our Chazal say, our sages say, Kone Eved, Kone Rabo. You buy a slave, you're buying yourself a master. Because you are obligated in the Torah to take care of them. Not only that, but if he's injured, you have to take care of him. If he loses a limb, he goes free. When he goes free, you have to give him presents. This is not, you understand that our experience in America, when we say the word slavery, we think of the antebellum South. And even in Maryland, Nebuch, they had slaves. And it was a horrible and atrocious institution. Slavery is always problematic, but in Jewish history, we had to treat slaves as human beings. That's where we differentiate from every culture historically, every single culture. The Romans with all their knowledge and high culture, they had slaves, thousands, millions of slaves. The Greeks the same, Europeans the same. All over the globe there was slavery, but they were like cattle. They treated other human beings as animals. Only in Jewish tradition there's a form of slavery where we treat human beings like human beings, even though they're obligated to work for us. We have to treat them as human beings. So it's a very different approach to what when the word slavery has a terrible connotation, but it's terrible. But in Jewish history, it's a different different attitude about how a human being is allowed to treat another human being. And Kal V'chomer for an Eved Ivri, who has to be treated very well, even better than an Eved Kanani. So this is a curse with a silver lining that yes, Canaan will be a slave, but he'll be fed and taken care of because he's a slave to Shem. He's a slave to the Jews. Kil et Isha, Hashem cursed the woman. Hakol ratzin acharecha, and everyone runs after the woman. And this is an interesting statement. The Pashta says men want to marry women. We know that the role of a man is to go out and find a wife. That typically the women don't go after the men and find the women, but the men go after the wife. I'm going to read one more line. I'm going to get back to this. Kil et Adama, Hashem cursed the earth. Hakol nizani nemenu, and everyone gets mizanos from the earth. So even though the earth was cursed, it's going to have thorns, it's going to have problems, but the earth still provides all our grain and our wine and our oil and everything like this. So what's going on is all these curses have a silver lining. And what happened is, so here's to the Isha, to the woman he said, I will greatly increase your suffering and your childbearing. In pain you will bear children. This is how as women give birth typically. So okay, maybe they have epidurals nowadays, it's a little different. And then it says, right after this, you'll desire your husband who yim sholbach, and he'll rule over you. So it's an interesting statement, but we see in here the man is chasing after the woman, so it sounds like she rules over him in a way. So it's an interesting contrast that men and women in Jewish wisdom, which is true wisdom, have different roles. That a woman has men pursuing her, and that's the nature of the game, but a man has to be an accomplished man because Adama was cursed. Adam has to work the land. What we call the burden of performance is on the man. A man has to become greater. A man has to grow in wisdom or grow in his parnasa, grow in his business. He has to develop his midos. He has to work on himself to a much greater extent to attract a good woman. A woman doesn't want a nebuch. A woman doesn't want someone who's a slob and doesn't have a job and doesn't have an outlook and isn't learning, isn't koveya itim, depending on where she's holding also. A man has the burden of performance after the land was cursed to really work on himself, work on the land, and build himself into something greater. And then the woman that he's chasing after is going to be interested in him. But the woman is pursued by the man. That's sort of the nature of the game. But a man has to become great in order to merit the wife he wants. So it's a very interesting Gemara. But every curse that Hashem gives, not like man, has this silver lining. Okay, last narrow line. Zochreinu et adoga. We remember the fish. Asher nochal b'Mitzrayim, that we ate in Mitzrayim chinam, for free. Free fish, Baruch Hashem. But there's a disagreement how to understand what's going on here, what they're really complaining about. Rav and Shmuel have different interpretations. Chadamar dogim, one says mamish, they're talking about fish. They just want the fish they had from the Nile. Chadamar arayos. The other one says, no, they wanted the arayos that they had in Mitzrayim. We're going to explain. It's not really arayos. We're going to explain what's going on. It's interesting what Rashi says. Rashi says an amazing thing. He says, doga lashon tashmish, k'mo v'yidgu l'rov. So now we understand that what somebody means. If someone says, I'm taking my wife on a fishing trip, so maybe he has another implication based on this Rashi. I don't know, most guys don't know this Rashi, so Baruch Hashem, in the Daf Yomi, we all know this Rashi. And as we understand, women don't like to go fishing. So we understand that maybe, I don't know, just maybe. Okay, so it's a machloket what it really means, what they're talking about. They're complaining about the fish, the free fish. Mandam are dogim, first wide line, Amad Hey, Amad Aleph, Dichsev, Nochel, eat. Talking about the fish we used to eat, so it must mean really the fish with the fins and the scales. Mandam arayas, one that says arayas, dichsiv chinam, it was free. So fish aren't free. Listen, the Mitzrayim wouldn't even give us straw. You think they're going to give us free fish? There's no way. The mandam arayas, the one who says that they're complaining about the arayas, hakasiv, nochel. It says they were eating it. Yeah, what do you mean you don't eat arayas? Lishnam aliyah, no, it's another euphemism. So we have a lot of euphemisms here, nakat. So dichsiv. In Mishlei, there's a euphemism here. Achla, about an adulteress. A woman who commits adultery, what does she say? Achla, she quote-unquote eats. There's the euphemism. Umachta piha, and she wipes her mouth. Rashi says this is the lower opening. V'amra lo palti oven. And she says, I haven't done anything wrong. She's wiping away the evidence. She's pretending nothing happened. And she's holding two contradictory ideas in her mind at the same time without any problem. So she's able to commit adultery and think she's done nothing wrong. She sort of is, more a heter on herself. So we see that eating is a euphemism for arayas. The mandam are dogim, the one who says mamish, they're complaining about the lack of fish. Ma'ichinam, what do you mean free fish? The Mitzrayim wouldn't give us free fish. Havumaitan lahu mehefkera. They were free because they were brought from Hefker, from the Nile River. We know we're going to learn in Bava Metzia, if something is swept away in the river, it's considered Hefker, because the person who lost it is miyayish. He gives up because his item fell in the river already, so you could take it home. So they got it from the Hefker. The Amar Mar, the master said, Kishahayu Yisrael Shavi Mayim, when they were in Mitzrayim, and they would draw water, and we're going to find out the women were drawing water. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mizamin lahem b'toich hamayim dogim ketanim b'chteihem. Hashem would put little fishies into their pots, so they actually had little fishies available for free in Mitzrayim. It was a gift, it was a kiss from Ribono Shalom, that even though we were enslaved and in a terrible situation, we did have free fish. So it sounds good for the one who says fish. Aval arayos la prizibu. They were not ports and arayos. We know famously in Chazal that the men and women in Mitzrayim were loyal to one another, that they didn't go after the Egyptians. I talked about it 2 weeks ago, that there's a concept of war brides, that when one nation was stronger and would take over another one, the women would go to the winners. We actually saw it during World War II in occupied Europe. Women would sleep with the Nazis. And then when France was liberated, there are a number of pictures you can find in historical records. The French resistance would go around shaving the heads of these women who had been living with the Nazi soldiers as a punishment because they had gone over to the strong ones. But in Mitzrayim, the Jewish women did not do that. The Jewish women were completely loyal. So they didn't have arayas. Because there's a pasuk like this, a pasuk of Shir Shirim, Gan na'ul achoti chala, your garden is locked, my sister, my bride. And it goes on, your mayan is satum, your wellspring, which is the spring of life, is closed up. You're not allowing any arayas. You're not going over to the Egyptians. Elamandam arayos, the one who says it's rayos, my mayan chatum. Mayan chatum is the end of that pasuk in Shir Shirim. Mehanach de sirin lahu, sirin lo pritzi behu. For the ones that were usher then, they were not porets. So they were still b'nei Noach. This was in Mitzrayim before Har Sinai. So there were still commandments on arayos, such as Eish Ish and direct family members, things like this. Those they were never involved with that. A man wouldn't marry someone else's wife. A man wouldn't marry his close relatives that were usher to b'nei Noach. And later on, there were more arayos commanded, and that's what they were complaining about later on when they were. We're going to see Bochel Mishpatam is the pasuk we're going to bring next. They weren't complaining about the arayos back then. They didn't do any arayos back then. What they were commanded. Bishlam Alamandam arayos, one who says that they're complaining about arayos, forbidden relations. Leinu dichsiv vayishma Moshe ta'am Bochel Mishpatam. And Moshe hears the people. They're crying to their family about their family. The Gemara says al iske mishpachotav. They're crying about matters of the family. Shenesru lahem. That they're now usher to them, lishkavet to sleep with them, to marry them. So what happened was before Matan Torah, a man could marry his aunt. Who's the most famous man who married his aunt? I heard Amram back there. You're right, Amram. Amram, the father of Moshe, married his aunt. And after Matan Torah, that was forbidden. So it's an amazing thing. We talked about this by David the Melech, that whenever you have a leader, you want the leader to have some skeletons in his closet, so he's not going to be such a Baal Gaiva and think he's perfect. Moshe Rabbeinu comes out of a relationship that later on the Torah would say is Asr. So men out there, you can marry your niece, Motor Deraita, but you can't marry your aunt anymore. So that's what they're complaining about. They're complaining they can't marry their aunt and a number of other arayos that had been mutter to Bnei Noach. So in Mitzrayim, in theory, yes, they could marry their aunt, they could marry other arayos that were family members. We're talking about family members here, but then the Torah went on later, added on prohibitions to Bnei Noach. You can't marry the aunt and certain other family members at all. So they were complaining about this. Ela Lemanda Amar Dogim, the one who says, Mamish Dogim, my Buchan Mishpachatav. What do you mean they're crying about their family? Which sounds that they're talking about they can't marry the aunts anymore and things like this. Hava ha havai. It's both, really. They were complaining about the fish mamish, and they were complaining about the forbidden arayos, that now they're under more restrictions about who they can legally marry than they had been in Mitzrayim. So it's hava ha. So they're complaining, once they started complaining about the fish, they're also complaining about arayos. So this is much later on. They're complaining about the man. We're going to see much later, the rest of the daf is about the man, but they were complaining about the man, they're complaining about the lack of fish. And once they started complaining, they kept complaining also about the arayos. So the Maharal says in Gur Aryeh, this is a dangerous thing. When you start complaining, and then you bring up other complaints. He says it's much better to focus on one thing at a time. You have one problem, focus on one problem, solve the one problem. Don't start bringing in all of these other problems. It's not going to help. Once you start complaining, the ball gets rolling, and you keep complaining. So it's interesting. So they started complaining about fish. They end up complaining about arayos. So what's the kesher? How does it work out? So there's a Gemara, and it's one of my favorite Gemaras. It's a famous Gemara because I've quoted it before, and you're going to love it. It's one of the best. All the Gemaras are best Gemaras, but it's one of the best Gemaras on this topic. It's in Sota Yud Aleph. Darish Rav Avira. Bischar Nashim Tzikanios. In the merits, in the reward of the righteous women. In that generation, Nigalu Yisrael Mitzrayim. The women saved us from slavery in Egypt. It's right here in the Gemara. The women went to draw water from the Nile. That's the Gemara we just had. This is the Dagim Mamish, the free fish. Hashem gave them free fish. They were going to get water. They got the free fish as well. And now this Gemara goes on. In their buckets, the Shavuot. So much fish, it was half water and half fish. That's beautiful. Uvayot, so they came home, shavchet shtei kederot, so they cooked two pots. Achat shel chamin, one hot water, achat shel dagim, and one was the fish. Umolichot etzlo baleihem l'sadeh, and they went out to their husbands who were working in the fields. Can you imagine? Not only did they cook dinner at home, but then they brought it out to the field where the husbands were exhausted, trying to gather straw, trying to make the bricks. And they washed their dirty husbands. Sachototan, they anointed them with oil. Malachiototan, and they fed them the fish. Umashkototan, they gave them to drink. Niskakot lehen, and then they got together there, out in the field, fed and happy and healthy and stomach full. So it says you lie there. In the merit of this lying, Zoch Yisrael lebizot Mitzrayim. So that's how we got the fortune of Mitzrayim also. So it's an amazing thing. We brought the other Gemara about the copper mirrors the women used, and the mirrors are also cited in this context. They would take out their mirrors, and their husbands are tired and exhausted, and they say, "Look, husband, I'm prettier than you are," and he says, "Oh yeah." So it's kind of like a little bit of a jealousy, a little shtuch, it's an interesting concept. But the women used these fish to seduce their enslaved, exhausted husbands and keep Am Yisrael going during the slavery. The men had given up. The men had given up on ever escaping Mitzrayim. And they said, Paro is going to throw the kids in the Nile. What's the point? What's the point of living with our wives as a normal family and having children? What's the point? The women did not give up. So it's not just that they cooked food for their husbands and brought the food out to their husbands and were attractive and seductive and using the mirrors and feeding them and anointing them. It wasn't just that. It was that the women did not give up hope, ever. They were not meyayish. There was no yayish by the women. And that's the schar nashim tzidkaniot. It's an amazing thing. The women did not give up, and that is exactly what saved us, what gave us the merit to escape from Mitzrayim. So that's the linkage between the fish and the relations, that the fish that they were missing from Mitzrayim reminded them of when their wives had cooked them the fish and then come out to the field, and from that they gave birth to many myriads of children, and in that merit from the women, they escaped from Mitzrayim. So it's really an amazing thing. So we're gonna get on to the man. It's very interesting. Why do we talk about man? Because we just said yesterday, we started this parak about we don't eat on Yom Kippur. We don't eat anything on Yom Kippur. We're going to see that the man it's a spiritual food. It's less physical and more spiritual. So on Yom Kippur, all of our involvement is in ruchnius. We're absorbing spiritual energy. We're absorbing spiritual food instead of physical food. It's beautiful. So we're in the wide lines here at the Kishuim. So here's the rest of this pasuk. We're going to read the whole pasuk because it's a delicious pasuk. I've got it here somewhere. Zacharnu at the daga asher nochal b'Mitzrayim. Remember the fish we ate Mitzrayim chinam for free at the Kishuim, and the cucumbers, at the avtichim, and the watermelons, at the chatzir, the leeks, at the betzalim, the onions, at the shumim, and the garlic. Now they're complaining about the man. We're going to see the man wouldn't taste like these specific items, these specific 5 foods, because they can be harmful to pregnant women. So Hashem didn't make them taste like this. We're going to see if it was the taste, the texture. So they're complaining about that. So we're going to find out the man could taste like everything, and they're complaining about the 5 things it wouldn't taste like. So Rav Ami, Rav Asi, Chad Amar, Tam Kol Minim Tamu B'man. He says they could taste anything they wanted in the man. Tam Chameshet Minim Halalu, but these 5 different things the pasuk just read, Lo Tamu Bo, they couldn't taste them because they were not good for pregnant women. Chad Amar, Tam Kol Minim Tamu, they could taste everything. Tamu Mamashan Halalu. Taman u'mashan. So he says, sorry, they could taste and have a texture of every single food in the world, but halalu, these 5 items, taman lu'mamashan. They could have the taste only, but not the texture. So it's even worse of a complaint. They could have the taste of the watermelons and the garlic, but not the texture. Oh, we're missing the texture of the garlic. You believe it? They're complaining about that. They have man, it can taste like anything. They're complaining they don't have the texture of their garlic. Amazing. Man, the kizera, God, lavan. Maravasi ogul kegida. It's round like the seed of a Rashi says an oleander. So apparently an oleander seed is round. We'll have to ask the botanists. I have a lavan, and what do you mean lavan? Because a oleander seed is not white. Kimargolit is white like a pearl. Tana Rabbanan should be the girsa. God, it's like a god. Shedome lezera pishtan. It's like a pishtan seed, like a flax seed. Begivolin in its stalk. So it's round. Acher me'omrim God shedome lehagoda. It's like Haggadah. Now, Haggadah we know means telling. We have the Haggadah Shel Pesach. Haggadah is Agadaic, like we're having now. Baruch Hashem, a daf with mostly Agadata, mostly stories and statements and advice from Chazal. And what does a Haggadah do? Shemoshechet libo sha'adam. That Haggadah draws in the heart. And you'll see this, because you'll hear in certain shirim, it can be a little dry. If it's all halacha, if everything is halacha, you need it. It's halacha l'maisa. It's absolutely the bread and butter of Judaism. But if you don't throw in some agada and some musar and some philosophy, it's a little dry. But if you have agada, you're moshechet libo. You pull on people's heartstrings, as you tug on the heartstrings, as we say in English. So it's moshechet libo sh'adam kamayim, like water. Like water draws the heart. So agada draws the heart. So the zerapishtan, the man would also draw the heart. People would crave it. They would want it. Tanya Idach, the other opinion says, God shemegid lahem Yisrael. It would tell Yisrael. It would tell us what? Iben tisha larishon, iben shiva la'achron. If it was a 9-month baby from the first or a 7-month baby from the second. So Rashi explains, I'll explain outside. We're talking about when a woman, Nebuch, became a widow, and then she remarried 2 months later. Or she was Nebuch divorced and remarried 2 months later, and then Mazel Tov, there's a baby. And we don't know if the baby's father was actually the first husband, and it's a 9-month baby, or if it was the second husband and it's a 7-month baby. And it has terrific ramifications for Yibum, for Yerusha. An 8th-month baby they don't mention because their Masurah, their medical knowledge back then was an 8-month-old baby would come out deformed and would be a nafel and would even be muksa on Shabbos. They were so sure it was going to die. And we're talking about a baby born after 8 months with deformities. And famously, Moshe Rabbeinu was a 7-month baby, and he actually came out after 6 months and 1 day, and was able to be, he came out full grown, but after a short time. So it seems that the Metzias then was that some babies would be born early. They'd come out in the 6th month, after 7 months, something like this, but they'd be full formed. And Moshe Rabbeinu was one of these. So there were 7-month babies and 9-month babies, no 8th-month babies. So Lamaisa, Lehalacha, a woman is not supposed to get remarried after 2 months, she's supposed to wait 3 months for Chodshei of Chana, so we actually know, because there are terrific ramifications, who the father is. It counts in Judaism who the father is. Of course, we understand our faith goes after the mother, but the Shevet and the Yerusha, the identity, the Kahuna go after the father. So it's terrifically important in Judaism. We have to know who the father is. So that it would actually tell us. And the Gemara is going to explain how. Lava and Shemalbin Avonotein Shel Yisrael. It would purify the sins of the Jews. Tanya Rabbi Yossi Omer Keshem Navi Haya Magilim Yisrael Masha Bechorin Mistakin. Just like a Navi could tell the Jews what's in the nooks and crannies. Kachaman Magid Lehen Yisrael Masha Bechorin Mistakin. It would tell us what's in the nooks and crannies. Ketzad, how does it work? Shnaim Shabal Lifnei Moshe Ledin. People came to Moshe for judgment. Zeomer Avdi Ganavta, you stole my slave. Zeomer Ata Mechartali. Said, you sold him to me. Amar Lehem Moshe Leboker Mishpat. He says, I'll tell you the judgment next morning. Lamachar Nimsa Omro B'Beis Rabbi Rishon. If they find the Omer of Man, the manna fell at the first master's tent. B'Yadua Shezeganavo. So the second guy had just stolen him. Im Nimsa Omro B'Beis Rabbi Sheni B'Yadua Shezemacharlo. Then you know he actually did buy him. So what's going on? How do they have slaves? They literally just left Shibud Mitzrayim. They were slaves in Mitzrayim. How do they have slaves at all? We know the Eruv Rav came with them, but they were converted to Judaism. So it seems to me, and this is Tzorchiyun, and if anyone finds an answer, please tell me. It seems to me there were Canaanim in Mitzrayim, and it's mutter to take Avadim from the 7 nations of Canaan. So it seems that the Mitzrayim had captured Canaanites and enslaved them, and then when the Jews left, these Canaanites said, we want to come along. The Jews said, but you're Canaanites. They said, but we'll be your slaves. So then perhaps they had Eved Canaanim, which sounds fantastic. We literally just left slavery to freedom, and we're bringing along slaves. It sounds fantastic. Again, slavery in Jewish tradition is a little different and more humane and more, definitely more humane than other slavery, but it's stark kasha, we say, that the Jews leaving slavery had slaves. That's the Gemara's mashma. Chen ish ve'isha, so to a man and woman, shabal livnei Moshe ledin. There is Shalom Bayis problem. The man says, she's spoiled, she's rotten on me, and I shouldn't have to pay her ksuva. No, it's his fault. He's the one starting up all the problems. We'll find out in the morning. If we find her food at the husband's tent, so really the husband wants her there, the food's there, but she's making the problem. If it's at his father's tent, so really Hashem wants her in the father's tent because he's making the problem. Al Hamachane, and the dew descended on the camp Laila at night, and Yara Deman Alav, and then the man would descend on the dew. Chsiv v'yatza ha'am v'laktu, but it also says the people went out and gathered. Chsiv shatu ha'am v'laktu, they spread out even farther. Shatu is even farther v'laktu, and then they gathered. Haketzaz, what does it mean? Did it fall mamish in the camp or further away? Tzadikim yardo petach b'tehem. Tzadikim got DoorDash. They got man delivered to the door. Beinonim yatzu v'laktu. The average people had to go out of their house and collect it. Rishayim shatu v'laktu. The Rishayim had to go out even farther to get their man. Ksiv lechem, ksiv ugo, ksiv tochanu. So it says about the man it was lechem. It also says it's ugo, which is cakes, which is less than bread. And also says tochanu, like it's grain. You have to grind it up and bake it. Haketzad tzadikim lechem. The tzadikim have it prepared. Beinonim ugo. The beinonim have cakes. Rishayim tochanu b'rachayim. They had to mill it first to eat it. O dachu b'medocha, or pound it in a mortar and pestle. Amar Yehuda, Amar Rav, V'item, Rabbi Chama bar Rabbi Chanina, Milamed, Sheyarad lahem Yisrael imaman. They got not just man, but they got tachshite nashim. They got decorations, makeup, cosmetics for the women. The Ben Yehoyada says the man itself could be a cosmetic. They would get sort of spices and fragrances. They'd grind that together with the man, and they'd apply it to their face, as we know that from Masechet Shabbat, that flour could be used as a makeup. Davar shenidach b'medocha, so something that's pounded, ground up, that's these cosmetics. Because the man was bread, so if you have to grind it up, it's something else. He's saying it's cosmetics made from the man. Bishlo b'farur, and you're going to bake it in the kli. Amar Rabbi Chama melamed sheyard lehem Yisrael im haman. So not just the man we got sikeh kader, we got spices, we got salt. The man could taste like anything, but sometimes you want to cook something with some spices and make it nice and sweet, says Rashi. They brought more donations to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle, every morning. My baboker. What do you mean? Each and every morning they brought something. Amar Shmuel bar Nachmani, Rabbi Yochanan, Midavar shiyared lehem baboker baboker. Something that fell from the sky every day, they gave as donations. Milimet shiyard lim Yisrael avanim tov magoliotim aman. It was not just food; it was also precious stones and pearls that they donated to the Mishkan. Fell with the man, and they brought them every morning to Moshe. Hanesiim heviu et avnei shoham. The Nesiim, which we usually understand as the princes, brought the avnei shoham. Tana Nesiim mamish. But this could be mamish the clouds. So it's not just the Nesiim, the princes. It could be these precious stones for the avnei shoham, avnei milim, for the ephod. They fell from the sky, and the Nesiim brought them after that. V'kenu omer Nesiim v'ruach v'geshem ayin. There's a pasuk that says there's Nesiim and ruach, meaning there's clouds and there's wind, but there's no rain. Hayatamo ketam leshod. So the taste of the man is described as the taste leshod shemen, of this wafer of oil. And Rav Bachu mashod. A shod is lashon, is the language of shadayim, of the bosom of a mother. Zetinok toyem ba kamatamim. A child tastes many different flavors from his mother based on what she's eating. Again, if she was eating garlic, it would go through and be harmful for the newborn baby. That's why it didn't taste like garlic. But the shod could taste like whatever she ate. Afaman, so to the manna, kol zman Yisrael ochli nazo, whenever they ate it, motzim b'kamatamim, they would find a lot of different flavors. Ikad amrei, some people say, not l'shad, l'shade, mamash, like a demon, ma shade zay metchafech l'kamagvonim, because they can change appearances and change colors. Afaman, metchafech l'kamatamim, it could change to different textures. It seems like it could change shape also. It's an interesting thing. So it could be anything. So what does Moshe mean when Moshe says prepare it on Friday? Remember, they got a double portion on Friday. It's not going to fall on Saturday. What do you mean prepare it? If it could taste like anything, why do you have to prepare the man at all? The chidah, he says an amazing thing. He says you have to think about what you want it to taste like. You have to think about it beforehand, that it's going to taste like whatever you want. So if you want your chicken soup and you want your fish, you have to think about it before Shabbos to get that taste. Because if you think about it on Shabbos, that'd be usher, because we know that on Shabbos, what's asur? Maleches machsheves, intentional malacha. And that's the greatest intention. He's intending his food to have a taste. So that's the chidah. It's amazing part. Hashem will give to you meat in the evening. This is the famous slav. Lechol, v'lechem baboker, and you'll get your bread, that's the man in the boker, lispa, to fill you up. Tana mishmei the Rebbe Yeshua ben Karcha, basar, sheshalu shelo kehogen. They asked for meat incorrectly, because they already had massive flocks of meat. They had a lot of cattle, but they were asking for meat. Why? We actually talked about this recently. They didn't want to bring their meat to the Mishkan and make it into a carbon. They wanted to eat it a little more hefkera, a little more backyard barbecue. They wanted shchutei chutz. That's why they wanted to do it all themselves. They didn't want to necessarily make it a carbon, make it elevated. So they were asking for some other sources of meat, even though they had meat, but all the meat they had would have to become karbanot. They have to bring it as a shlamim in the Mishkan. So because they asked shelo kehogen, not appropriately, nitan lahem shelo kehogen. So the basar, the slav, it fell at night when it's harder to use, turning over Amid base. Lechem shelo kehogen. They asked for bread appropriately because mamish there was nothing to eat anymore. Nitan lahem kehogen. So it's given to them at a good time in the morning when there's time to prepare it and eat it. Mikan lam the Torah derech eretz. The Torah is teaching you derech eretz shelo yochel adam basar ele b'layla. You should eat meat at night. Lamaisa, if someone's making a bris and he wants to be yotze, the Rambam ein simcha lebasar b'yayin. I've been to a fleishig bris where they're serving fleish at 7:45 in the morning. It does happen. They had fish also, so we were yosei the daga, but it does happen because the Rambam says you should have fleish by a simcha. But here it's saying, it's nice to have it at night. But Hamar Abaye, yesterday we said, Haiman de Islay Suda, if you have a nice Suda, lo achle ele mama, eat it during the daylight. Kenya mama, listen, if you've got a torch, you've got candles, you can see the food. Seeing the food, it's more satisfying. Come in, that's what we're saying. Amar Ravacha Bar Yaakov, Betchila, Hay Yisrael Domin Ketarnagolim. Originally, the Jews were like hens. Shemenachim ba'ashba. They're pecking for scraps of food in the trash heap. Alchaba Moshe kavalim zman seuda. So Moshe said, listen, we're going to have bread in the morning, we're going to have meat in the evening. We're not going to be snacking all day long. This is Rav Asai, Rambam says this too. This is medical advice, this is practical advice. Do not be snacking all day long. Do not hang out in your kitchen. Straight from Moshe Rabbeinu. Can't do better than that. Abasar Dana ben Shinehem, the meat was still between their teeth, and this was when the complainers, they were complaining for meat, and they died. Ksiv ad chodesh yomi, but also says right after that, it was up to a month later. HaKetzad, what's going on?
Beinonim, the average people, the average complainers, people who are starting up the complaint about the mana, la'alter metu. They died right away after they tasted the meat. But the Rishayim, mitztarin v'halchin ad chadishavim, the real Rishayim, who are really instigating and complaining about the mana, we hate this mana, lechem kolokal, it's terrible, they had to suffer intestinal problems for an entire month before they passed. Nebuch. Vayishchatu, vayishtachu. So don't read it yishtachu spread out. Read it yishchatu. Change the letters. They shechted it. So we see that the haters of the Jews, and in this context it means the ones who were starting the complaint against Hashem, against Moshe, against the manna, they were chayev shchita, and that's why they passed away from eating the slav, from eating the quail that they got as the reward, as their just desserts. Shatoach. What does it mean? Shatoach, spread out over the ground. Tana mishmei de Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha al tikra shatoach ele shachut. Amed she'ardachem Yisrael imaman davar shatan shchita. So not only did they get the man, but they got the slav. We're going to see this quail, this bird that needed a shchita. Amar, first right line. Amar Rebbe v'chi mikan the talame. From here you learn it needs shchita. Halok varnemar vayamtar aleihem ka'afar she'ar kachol hayam kol yam of kanaf. But it says, I will rain down to you like the dust and like the sand of the sea, birds on the wing. So we see it's birds. So what do you mean? You need to learn shatoach, shachut, that birds need shchita. We know that birds need shchita. These slav, these quails are called birds. Tanya, Rebbe Yomer, zavachta kasher tiviticha. You will slaughter them like I have taught you. Lamed shenistavah Moshe al haveshet v'lakana. That Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded on the veshet and the kana, the trachea and the esophagus of the animal. Al rov echad ba'ov, al rov shnayim behema. And you need the rove of one simon to have kosher shchita, to have a proper slaughtering of a bird, and the majority of both pipes, both the kana and veshet, to have a behema. So this is interesting because the Torah never tells you hilchot of shchita. So one of the proofs, not that we need a proof, we have Mesorah, one of the proofs Torah Sheba'al Peh was given the same time as Shabbat Kesav is Zavachta Kasher Tiviticha. Slaughter it like I taught you. It's never taught in the Torah Shabbat Kesav. It's never in the Chumash. So it was Torah Sheba'al Peh. And now we have a whole Masechta of Chulin, which Baruch Hashem we learned, some of us learned together, Chulin, about this topic. So this is a little chazar for this. What do you mean shatoach, spread out? Melamed, this teaches, Yar Lechem, Mashtichin. It was layers and layers of slav. Layers and layers of birds fell. Ksiv lechem, ksiv shemen, so it's ksiv dvash. So the man is called bread, it's called oil, it's called dvash. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, and Arim, for the young men, lechem, it's bread, it's more filling. We know that teenagers have a big appetite. There's a kadim shemen, for the older, it's oil. Tanaga is dvash, and for the young ones, it's honey. Ksiv, they say don't feed honey to very young infants because it can have pollen and spores in it, just FYI. Good. Ksiv, slav, krinan, slav. So it's written slav mitashin, but we read it slav with the samech. Because it is a sin, not a shin. Rabbi Chanina, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Tzadikim ochlin oto b'shalva. So we can read it shlav, shalva. They ate it in tranquility and peace. Rishayim ochlin oto v'dam silvin. So when the Rishayim ate it, it was more like thorns. They had been inappropriately asking for it, so it was like thorns in their digestive system. Amar Chanan bar Rava, arba mine slav hen. There's actually 4 types of quail. Ve'elohen, the sichli, the kivli, the fisyoni, the slav. Malia dechulu sichli, goida dechulu slav. So the slav is the average kind of quail. Havikitzibrata, it's a very small bird. So it was a small bird that they were eating. Matvina la betanura, but they would put it was very fatty. We're going to see they would stick it in an oven. V'tafach, it would be inflated from all the fat content. It would be puffed up when they would bake it in the oven. Hava mole tanura, and it would fill up the whole oven. Umaskinan le etzleisa rife, they would put it on top of 13 slices of bread. And the last slice of bread absorbed so much oil. The oil was dripping down from the bird through all your bread. Even the last slice of bread was so oily, you had to eat it with other things, with toppings. Rav Yehuda, Mishtachach le Beidani. Rav Yehuda would find slav between his barrels. He had barrels of wine or something, he would find birds and delicious. Kavod Shabbos. Rav Chista, Mishtachach le Beitzive. He would find them out in the field. Rava Maite le Arisei. Rava had an aris, had a sharecropper who would bring him a slav kol Yoma. Every day would bring him a slav to eat. They're beautiful, like in the midbar. Yoma chad lo aite. So one day he didn't bring it. Amar mai hai. So he's wondering why the bird didn't come today to his field. Solakli igri went up on the roof. Shamali yanuka, and he hears a child. and the child saying a pasuk is interesting that we say that prophecy was removed from the world except among children. Children saying psukim is still a form of prophecy. If you overhear children saying psukim, there might be a reason for that, Rabbi say. So, interesting concept. To Kalmar, what did the Yeled say? The Tinuk said, Shamati v'tirgas bitni. I heard, and my stomach was upset. Amar Shema Mina, he says, we learn from here, Nach Shid Rav Chisda. I've learned here that Rav Chisda passed away, Vadil Rabbah, and it was only in the merit of my rabbi, Achol Talmida, that I, the Talmud, was eating. Rashi points out, wasn't just his Rebbe, it was his father-in-law. So Nebuch, his father-in-law, passed away, and now he's less parnasa. So it's a lamaisa, but he understood in the merit of his Rebbe and father-in-law, he was getting sent this bird, and that's why it stopped. Ksiv atal shechvat atal, it's written, and it goes up the dew, this layer of dew. Ksiv aredet atal, also says the tal went down, so you have moisture coming up from the ground and coming down from the sky. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina, tal mimala, tal mimata, there is tal from above and tal from below, v'dome k'moshe munach bekufsa, and the man famously was in the middle of the layers of tal. So it was the first Ziploc bag. So there's a makor in the Torah for Ziploc bags. For storage, it was stored. So could you open it on Shabbos? That's another shaila for the Rav. But mistama they could. Dak mechuspas. The man's also called dak thin and mechuspas. We're going to learn out what does this word mean. Aber reish lokish. Davar she'muach al pisat yad, because it would melt in the palm of your hand. It was so fine and oily. Rabbi Yochanan Amar davar she'nivla b'metayim v'arbaim b'shmone avarim. So he says it melts into your 248 limbs, because mechuspas has a gematria. Mechuspas tuva. I say no, mechuspas is a little more in gematria. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak mechaspas kasiv, and that word mechaspas is 248, meaning the man would absorb into all of the 248 limbs of your body and not be excreted. There's no waste left over. We're going to see. Tanar banan lechem abirim achol. They ate the lechem abirim is what the man is called. Ish lechem. Achol ish lechem shemalchei sharet ochlin aser. So malachei sharet are the abirim, the mighty ones. So we ate the same bread that the angels eat. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. That's what Rabbi Akiva says. Kashanemra devarim livdei Yishmael. When he says in front of Yishmael, his teacher, Amar lahem tzur Amar lo Akiva Akiva taita. Go tell him he's wrong. Ki malachei sharet ochlin lechem. What? Angels eat bread? They don't eat bread. Halo kvar nemar. It says by Moshe Rabbeinu, lechem lo achalti, mayim lo shatiti. If Moshe Rabbeinu went up for 40 days and nights, he didn't eat and drink anything. As a Kavachomer, angels are always up in heaven. They don't eat and drink anything. We know they did by Avram Avinu. They didn't really eat and drink, but they were making it look like they're eating and drink. So you should always behave in a way that's derech eretz, that's normal. You know, don't pretend to be angels. Elamani makayim abirim. What do you mean abirim? Lechem shenivla b'metayim v'arbaim shmone evarim. So avirim means it absorbed fully into the limbs. It didn't have waste left over. Lamani makayim vayated tielech necha. So why do you need a shovel? The Torah says have a shovel. In addition to your weapons and your tools, you need a shovel, and that was to bury the solid waste. We don't leave waste out in the holy camp. So what's the shovel for? To bury the waste, which was a result from the Devarim Shatari Umos Ha'olam Mochri Natan, because they would buy things from peddlers in the desert, and those things would produce solid waste when they were eaten. So they would be buying other things. Rabbi Elazar ben Parta Amar Af Devarim Shatari Umos Ha'olam Mochri Lahen Man Mafigan. The man would help them dissolve, so there wouldn't be any waste even from those. Elamani Mekayim V'Yata Tielach Halos Necha. So why do you need a shovel? After they complained about the man and they went bad, now Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, and they amar to you, you were going to be like angels and not have any solid waste. Now you have to schlep 3 parsaot, because someone's in the front of the camp. They had to go all the way to the back of the camp to dig a hole and leave their solid waste there and bury it. They came to the Yarden, Mibeit Shimon, Ad Evlashitim, Amarabba Barachana, Lididi Chazi Lilahu Atra. I saw this place where the Jews camped in the Midbar. Havitzlata Parse, it's 3 parsa across. So someone at one end of the camp, the front end, has to go all the way 3 parsa to the back of the camp to leave himself. Tanaka Shenifnin, Ein Nifnin Lo Lifneim Lo Letzadeim, they wouldn't go in the front or the sides, El Achreim. Because, and we're going to end with this, we never went backwards. When we were in the midbar, we didn't go backwards. We might go to the side, we might go to the front, we don't know, so we would not leave solid waste in those areas. We never go backwards. We're always growing. Every single daf, every single day, we're growing in our wisdom, in our ruchniut, in our connection to Hashem. We never go backwards. Every daf, we are moving forwards. Thank you.